I was forced by my father-in-law to sleep with him to get pregnant. A true infidelity story. Hello, everyone. My name is Nancy, and I am proud to say that I was born and grew up in South Padre Island, a well-known coastal town in the state of Texas. But my family faced financial struggles and lived a modest life, barely managing to make ends meet. Because of our limited resources, I wasn't able to pursue higher education like many of my peers who went off to college. After I completed high school, I immediately took on a job at a local supermarket as a sales clerk to help support my family financially. While life was challenging and at times overwhelming, I understood that I needed to step up and contribute to our household income as best as I could. In the early part of 2022, when I was 26 years old, I had the wonderful fortune of meeting and marrying my husband. He is 4 years older than me and works diligently as an auto mechanic at a small garage located near the town center. His calm demeanor and quiet nature gave me a sense of security and trust, leading me to believe that together we could create a stable and fulfilling life. Interestingly, my husband is Japanese-American, with a multicultural background that adds a rich layer to our family story. While his mother is American, his father is Japanese. My husband's family is truly special, as it beautifully blends two distinct cultures into one harmonious household. My mother-in-law, who embodies the essence of a typical American woman, is warm, approachable, and outgoing. She actively embraces a modern lifestyle, often involving herself in a variety of community activities, such as yoga classes, social gatherings, and local events that bring people together. She places significant importance on preserving traditional American family values, balancing her progressive outlook with respect for the past. Her demeanor is gentle and polite, and she always shows a degree of care and concern for me, even if it sometimes feels like it's more on the surface than deeply rooted. In contrast, my father-in-law represents a completely different cultural perspective, steeped in the traditions and conservative mindset of an older generation Japanese man. He is approximately 55 years old and has a calm, composed exterior that conceals a more complex and unpredictable inner nature. When he first moved to the United States, he found work in construction, a field where he spent years building a solid foundation for his family's future. Eventually, he transitioned to becoming a manager in a small machine shop, a role that allowed him to rise steadily in his career. Although he is now retired, his presence in the family remains significant. He serves as the spiritual leader and guide, offering wisdom and maintaining the family's sense of direction, rooted in both tradition and discipline. After we were married, even though our life was far from rich or extravagant, I genuinely felt content and happy. We had a simple, modest lifestyle, working hard together and finding joy in the little things that each day brought. I truly believed that as long as we had each other, we could overcome any challenge and make life fulfilling. However, what I didn't foresee was how gradually the mental and physical shortcomings in our relationship would begin to chip away at that initial sense of happiness and optimism. To be completely honest, my husband, despite his appearance of being big and strong, struggles significantly with sexual performance. This has become a major issue in our relationship, and I find myself at a loss for how to effectively address it. He frequently experiences premature ejaculation, and each time it occurs, I can't help but feel a wave of disappointment wash over me. I have made efforts to not allow this situation to negatively impact our relationship, but the ongoing nature of the problem has gradually made our life together feel increasingly dull and unfulfilling. What makes this even worse is that, after more than a year of marriage, we still haven't been able to have children. The lack of progress in maintaining the warm fire of married life has added an immense amount of pressure and weight to my shoulders, both emotionally and mentally, as I grapple with expectations and the growing strain on our relationship. My husband is the eldest son of his family, and more importantly, he is their only son. Apart from him, there is a younger sister in the family, but since she is still in college, The prospect of her getting married and starting a family is something far off in the future. This has placed the entire weight of the family's expectations and the responsibility of producing children to carry on the family name squarely on our shoulders. The pressure was inescapable, a burden I felt deeply and constantly. It wasn't just the weight of my husband's family's expectations pressing down on me. It was also the pressure I placed on myself. I could sense that my husband was feeling it too, even though he never openly expressed it. Instead, he coped by retreating into silence and focusing on working harder, as though staying busy could make the problem disappear. For me, the struggle was more direct and unrelenting. Each day I had to endure the unspoken yet palpable questions lingering in the eyes of my mother-in-law, who seemed to be silently asking when she would become a grandmother to my child. Then there were the watchful, almost critical glances from my father-in-law, whose traditional views only amplified the intensity of their expectations. It was painfully clear that my husband's family wanted and even demanded something more from me, something I felt powerless to provide. And yet, the real problem was that my husband refused to confront the issue. His silence left me alone to bear the brunt of it all, with no clear path forward. Over time, these unresolved tensions began to create a widening distance between us. The cracks in our marriage grew deeper, formed not by major arguments, but by the accumulation of countless small, unspoken grievances. These unsaid truths, though subtle, quietly eroded the foundation of our relationship, altering everything in ways we couldn't ignore. One evening, my husband's parents gathered us together, sitting with a solemn demeanor that suggested they were preparing for a significant conversation. The atmosphere was thick with tension, even before they uttered a word. When my mother-in-law gently proposed that we visit a doctor to determine if there were any underlying issues, I was not taken aback at all. In fact, I had been anticipating this discussion for quite some time. It was clear to me that our inability to have children had become a major source of concern for them, and no matter how kindly she framed her words, the suggestion carried an undeniable weight, a pressure that settled over me like an oppressive cloud. I remained silent, my gaze fixed on my hands, as my mother-in-law continued to elaborate on her concerns, emphasizing that she merely wanted to ensure that everything was all right and that no one was facing any serious health issues. I understood the subtext of her words clearly. While she hadn't said it outright, I could sense that she was quietly questioning my fertility. At that moment, I experienced an odd and overwhelming sense of shame, as if the entire situation were solely my fault, weighing heavily on my conscience, even though I knew logically it wasn't fair to feel that way. The conversation, though gentle on the surface, left me feeling exposed and deeply vulnerable, as if I were being silently judged for something beyond my control. Nevertheless, my husband reacted quite differently. He straightened in his seat, his expression tightening with visible tension. Without hesitation, he outright refused the suggestion, declaring firmly that there was no need for any tests. His tone carried a sharp edge, and I could sense that his reaction stemmed from a need to protect his pride. Admitting the possibility of a problem was something his ego simply wouldn't allow. Whenever I tried to address the issue with him privately, he would either evade the topic or dismiss it entirely, as though it were insignificant. Yet the reality was undeniable. This unspoken issue had grown into a looming shadow that affected every aspect of our lives. My in-laws exchanged glances with him, and the atmosphere in the room became increasingly oppressive. The stillness was thick with unspoken disappointment, but no one said anything more. I had the impression that I was torn between two realities. On the one side, it was the wife's duty to bear a child in order to maintain the family line. On the other side was my husband, steadfast in his denial and unwilling to confront the issue, leaving me stranded and unsure of how to navigate such a complex and deeply emotional situation. As time went on, the atmosphere in the house grew increasingly suffocating, almost palpable in its weight. Meals, once a time for bonding and conversation, turned into tense, uncomfortable gatherings where unspoken frustrations lingered in the air. Each time I encountered my in-laws, I felt an invisible force bearing down on me, a pressure that seemed to seep into every interaction. Their seemingly innocent questions about my health and their well-meaning words of encouragement no longer felt like expressions of concern. Instead, they felt like sharp blades, cutting into the core of my growing fears and insecurities. Not having children in our lives had transformed into an unhealed wound that deepened with every passing day, a silent ache that shadowed my every thought and action. One evening in August 2023, a day that remains etched in my memory because the events that unfolded completely transformed my life. My husband had a work party that evening, which meant he would be coming home quite late. As was typical, my mother-in-law was off attending her yoga class with friends, leaving just me and my father-in-law alone in the house. At that moment, I never imagined that he could pose any danger to me. I simply regarded him as a family member, even though our relationship had never been particularly close or intimate. After a long and tiring day at work, I decided to take a refreshing shower and slipped into a short dress, primarily because I wanted to feel comfortable while at home. I then headed to the kitchen to prepare dinner for both of us. I didn't think much of it. It felt like just another ordinary meal shared between two family members. However, I can still vividly recall the moment I walked into the living room and noticed my father-in-law sitting in a chair, his eyes staring at me with a little odd expression, though I didn't fully pay attention on it at the time. I called him in for dinner, as I normally would, and he stood up, moving slowly into the kitchen. At first, everything seemed perfectly normal, yet there lingered an uneasy sensation within me that I couldn't quite put my finger on. After finishing the meal, I stood at the sink, washing dishes. The kitchen was silent except for the gentle sound of running water, and I was entirely absorbed in my task, unaware of what was about to unfold. Suddenly, I felt a pair of arms wrapped tightly around my waist from behind. Startled, I turned around in alarm, and I found it was my father-in-law. In that instant, I was frozen with confusion and disbelief, unable to process what was happening. I wanted to cry out, to push him away, but he covered my mouth. I couldn't break free, and my desperate pleas seemed to vanish into the air. Victoria closed her eyes and began whispering something, and I waited portly. He held me tightly, and while I was still frozen in shock, he leaned in and whispered that he would help me conceive. A chill surged through my body at his words, filling me with disgust, yet I felt powerless to act. Before I could even process what was happening, he moved swiftly and forcefully. It all unfolded so quickly that I had no chance to resist. The moment was horrifying. My body went numb, and I could only stand there, paralyzed as everything transpired beyond my control. When it was finally over, I crumbled to the ground, clutching my head and sobbing uncontrollably. Shame, revulsion, and fear overwhelmed me, suffocating me. Yet my father-in-law, with an unnervingly calm and detached demeanor, simply stated that he did it for the family's happiness. Then he stood up and went away, as though nothing had occurred, leaving me engulfed in turmoil and despair. That night, I couldn't bring myself to tell my husband. I had no idea how to confront the situation. I feared that speaking up might push things too far, leaving our marriage irreparable. So I made the difficult choice to remain silent, burying the pain and fear deep inside, pretending as though nothing had happened. But after that first time, everything changed. I tried to go on with life as usual, maintaining a facade of normalcy. Yet, every time I encountered my father-in-law, an uncontrollable fear gripped me, leaving me trembling. His gaze was no longer the calm, indifferent one I had once known. Instead, it carried something darker, possessiveness, a desire I'd never seen before. That look left me bewildered and terrified, dragging me into a relentless cycle of guilt and inner turmoil from which I couldn't break free. The following evening, not long after the first incident, my husband stayed late at work, and my mother-in-law went to her usual yoga class. Left alone at home, I felt a growing sense of unease. The dread of being alone with my father-in-law lingered, an ever-present shadow in my mind. That evening, as he entered the house, I sensed that the worst was about to unfold once more. There were no sidelong glances or hesitations this time. He strode directly toward me, and before I could process what was happening, he dragged me into a room. Everything happened so quickly that I couldn't react or resist. The door shut firmly behind us. In the confined space, his heavy breathing was uncomfortably close to my ear. This time, he was far more aggressive. My weak attempts to resist only seemed to fuel his determination. I tried to push him away, but my efforts only drew him closer, forcing me to confront the grim reality that escape was impossible. What startled me most, even in that terrifying moment, was the calculated control he seemed to possess. Even at the age of 55, my father-in-law possessed a power and skill in bed that I had never witnessed in my husband. Despite his large stature, my spouse was usually weak and hurried when it came to intimacy, which eventually caused me to feel dissatisfied and distant. On the other hand, my father-in-law was fully aware of his actions. Every gesture and action was brimming with authority and dominance. I was reluctant to acknowledge it, but inside I experienced something I had never felt with my husband, a mix of pleasure and guilt, fear intertwined with shame. I was uncertain about what to do. All I knew was that I had become entangled in something from which I couldn't escape. Once it was ended, I sat down with a heavy heart, but he behaved as if nothing had occurred, as if it were something normal, a part of life I had to accept. After that, my father-in-law and I grew even more secretive. Whenever my husband was away or my mother-in-law was occupied, it became a chance for him to approach me. Each time I saw him, the air was thick with tension, yet there was also an undeniable pull toward him, despite my logic and resistance. It was a complicated feeling, a blend of hatred and suppressed desire that I couldn't resist, a connection I couldn't break free from, no matter how sinful it felt. We both knew what we were doing was wrong, but neither of us appeared to be able to stop. I discovered that I was becoming more and more enmeshed in this connection, caught between feelings of remorse and uncontrollable emotions. A year later, I gave birth to a son, the child my husband's family had long awaited, hoping it would ease the pressure they had felt all this time. For everyone else, it was a joyous occasion, a symbol that the family was complete. But for me, it was an obsession, a consequence of a terrible secret I had to carry alone. As I looked at my son, both loving and painful feelings washed over me, wondering if he could sense the truth about his birth. Every time I held him, I felt the weight of my heart, heavy with the burden I alone had to bear. The woman. After our child was born, my husband and I moved away. While having a child brought my husband some happiness and peace, I felt an invisible barrier had formed between us. The closeness we once shared had completely vanished. Whenever I looked into his eyes, I felt as though I was concealing something unforgivable. Guilt weighed heavily on me every single day, tormenting my conscience. I couldn't bring myself to tell him the truth. I knew that if I confessed, everything, our life, our family, our children, would crumble. I lacked the courage to face such a devastating outcome. So I chose to bear it alone, to carry the pain in silence, and to live with the suffocating weight of secrecy. Each day, I had to act as if everything was normal, as if I didn't carry a terrible secret. But inside my heart, I could always feel the distance between us. Even though he doesn't know, I still feel guilty toward my husband. It feels like I've betrayed him, not just physically, but emotionally as well. But I don't know how to escape this cycle when the truth is too painful to confront and the silence is slowly consuming me. I stand here, carrying the weight of this pain in my heart, unsure of what to do next. My son, my husband, my family, everything feels so fragile, as if one confession from me could destroy it all. But I can't carry this guilt forever. I wonder if I should tell my husband the truth about the secret relationship with my father-in-law, about the real reason behind my guilt. If I confess, will he forgive me? Our lives would likely be changed forever, and I might lose everything. Or should I keep quiet and bury this secret? I could live with the torment if it meant protecting my family and my child from destruction. But this silence is eating me alive, trapping me in pain and shame. I honestly don't know what to do. What would you do in my place? Should I confess to free myself, or remain silent to protect my family? I need guidance and advice from those who truly understand this feeling. That's the wrap-up of today's video. Thank you so much for watching. If you found our content engaging, a thumbs up and sharing it with your loved ones would be much appreciated. Make sure to subscribe to our channel, Love 30K Stories, and turn on the notification bell for updates on our latest videos. Until next time, take care and goodbye.